My second point is when Gavin Newsom suggests that California does cooperate with ICE. Now, he doesn't really go into too much detail and is pushed back by Ben Shapiro on this issue, but I'd like to get into a little bit more of a nitty gritty detail. So, SB 54, also known as the California Values Act, passed in 2017, limits the ability of California state law enforcement, local law enforcement, and jails to cooperate with ICE. It prevents the honoring of ICE detainers and uh, a number of other aspects to the law. The exceptions are serious felonies. There's a list of them, and I'm not going to give the details of that list here, but they are generally serious felonies. Uh, I'm not going to give the details because of length and also because I'm not sure of YouTube's censorship policy, and I don't want to get into trouble with that. But if you think of a serious felony, it might be on that. It's probably on that list, right? A heinous act, shall we say, and certain gang-related offenses. Okay, it blocks ICE access to courts, schools, and hospitals, and other venues such as these. It bans federal agents from wearing masks. It um, it does exempt the prison system. To be clear, state prisons are not county jails. Okay, let's take an example of San Quentin. I think is still a prison in California. That's a prison, and then you have, say, I actually don't know of any particular Los Angeles County jails, right? Those two things are different, right? Jails are generally where people are held prior to a trial, and once they are convicted of a crime, if it's a felony, they will then go to the state prison, right? Um, Now, the interesting thing about this prison exemption is that uh, offenses of a violent nature uh, are exemptions to this law only if they've been committed within 5 years of a misdemeanor or within 15 years if it's a felony. Okay. Obviously, if you're talking about a 15-year window where someone might be, liable to be deported if they're an illegal immigrant convicted of a serious felony in the state, then they're likely to, that 15-year period will basically likely expire before they're out of prison. So once they get out, they're not going to be subject to deportation. That is, I do have to recognize, however, that while they are in prison, they would be subject possibly to an ICE detainer. But I don't believe it says anything about the prison system notifying ICE that they have an illegal immigrant in custody. I'm not 100% sure of that. It's not in my notes. I did go through the law and it's not something I wrote down. So, as far as my certainty is, generally certain it doesn't say anything about the county notifying ICE of the inmate being an illegal immigrant if they're convicted of a serious felony. Okay, which is a problem, right? The law specifically bars inquiry into immigration status, the honoring of a federal hold by ICE, CBP, or providing any information to federal officials about release date or other information about an inmate that is not public information. The California Values Act also repealed Section 11369, which required the notification of immigration officials when a person was arrested for certain drug offenses. Now, if you go through and look at Section 11369 of the law of the California Penal Code as it is now, it is replaced with something called Alexandra's Law. Which has to do with drug-related offenses, but I don't believe, has anything to do with immigration enforcement or the conduct of state officials towards ICE or other immigration enforcement proceedings. Okay, just to be clear that one was pre-Values Act and one was post-Values Act, so there might be some confusion if you go and look these things up. Now, Newsom suggests Oh, and by the way, to reiterate, this is the extent of the cooperation with ICE. Oh, yes, getting uh, convicted serious offenders off the street, which is already what ICE is doing, and going no further than that. So there are millions of illegal immigrants in California, and I mean millions of illegal immigrants in California, and you're going after, I believe he cited the number 10,000 of them. What is that? Less than 1%, right? So I think it's a little bit disingenuous to suggest that, California is working with ICE. I mean, maybe in the most extreme cases, you have the opportunity to work with ICE, yeah, if it's the prison system, but nowhere else. Nowhere else. And this is one of the reasons for this series of podcasts is to show how Gavin Newsom is trying to come across as something of a moderate, something that, sane Republicans could vote for as well as the left could vote for, because he's positioning himself to run for president. It's very clear. He just hasn't announced it officially yet, and that will likely come after the midterms. Uh, because that's generally when presidential campaigns are announced is shortly after the midterms, up to a couple of months after the midterms into the new year afterwards. But in any case, that's the reason why I'm putting these podcasts out to show you that he might be a slick politician, as slick as his hair is slick. Uh, I wish I had as good looking hair because obviously, I'm having you know, aging issues there. But in any case, he's a slick politician. You expect him to try and weasel his way into the middle, even though his record suggests something far different, right? His record, his rhetoric, so forth, right? Now, one of the things that Newsom says, and I, I feel like a lot of people could agree with this on its face, federal law should be enforced by federal law enforcement agencies. Okay, fair enough. If it's the federal law, then it's not up to the state to enforce it. Sure. But here's my problem. First of all, why are you getting in the way of ICE agents? Why are you getting in the way of immigration enforcement? And particularly, Mayor Karen Bass in Los Angeles and in general, the Los Angeles political system has taken every effort to isolate, to shield illegal immigrants from ICE detention, which is absurd. You are actively flouting federal law and legitimate federal law enforcement operations. That seems to be some sort of crime. Does it rise to the level of insurrection? Perhaps, because if you are actively trying to prevent the federal government from conducting its statutorily obligated duties, then you're obstructing the federal government in that process, and that is a crime itself. Um, it is extraordinary to me that the Trump administration, for all the things it has been accused of doing in terms of political opponents, has not acted against people like Mayor Karen Bass or Gavin Newsom or Governor Walz or Mayor Fry up until recently, on those last two, in regards to any sort of obstruction charge or insurrection charge, even though they seem to be quite within that red area of what kind of conduct is acceptable. All right, that's the first point. Why are you getting in the way then? And the second point is, why are you complaining when federal law enforcement is conducting these operations that are meant to execute the law, execute the federal law? Now, here's the thing. If you have a problem with immigration law, I'm saying you as the general, you as the person, you as the politician, whatever, then there's a process by which you can change that. And getting out protesters to scream at ICE and harass ICE, and in some cases run over ICE agents or use your vehicles to harm them or actually shoot and kill. I don't think I can use that word on YouTube. Then, yeah, that is a big, big problem. The avenue for you is to lobby for a change in the law. There's been some talk about reforming ICE. Okay, what do the reforms look like? I don't know. I don't have see anything specific that they suggest, and I don't trust the left to do anything legitimate when it comes to reforming ICE, because I think all that means is castrating them and preventing them from conducting their statutorily obligated duties. All right. Um, county and state jails. My suggestion is that county and state jails should be required. First of all, required 100%, no questions asked, to honor ICE detainers. There's no reason why they shouldn't be uh, allowed or required, especially, to honor. We need you to hold this person for such time so we can get there and pick him up because he's an illegal immigrant and he's going to be subject to deportation. Okay, fine. Period. I don't care what their legal status is in regards to the reason why they're in jail. If they're going to be released, then and there's a detainer on them, then they shouldn't be released until ICE comes and get them. That should be across the board. Unfortunately, the problem with that proposal is the same as the opposite side, the reform of ICE proposal, is that it would have to be passed by law. And in order to do so, you will need to deal with, the filibuster in the Senate and legislative issues. And this is one of the going on a little bit of a tangent. One of the issues with getting new legislation passed is that there's very, you have to have a larger consensus on a piece of legislation at the federal level to get it passed into law. And uh, because of the filibuster in the Senate. I'm not going to talk about the filibuster here. It's for another podcast. But it goes both ways, because I already mentioned how your ICE reforms aren't going to happen, and my suggestion about detainers being honored, under federal law is not going to be passed either. Another suggestion I would have is that same thing along these same lines is that county and state jails and prisons should be required to notify ICE directly that they have an illegal immigrant in custody, because that illegal immigrant may have, especially if they're in a prison, already know they have committed a crime, and so they are one of the groups of illegal immigrants that are legitimate. Well, everyone is legitimately being targeted, but is more subject to being targeted for deportation. Okay. Um, of course, again, this would have to be passed by Congress, and that's just not going to happen. So you're at an impasse here, and whatever your idea of ICE reforms are, maybe this can be paired with this sort of thing, so that yes, you might have less visible ICE enforcement on the streets, but when they get into the jail system, all bets are off. ICE is going to get you. I I don't necessarily think I would go for the reforms that take ICE off the streets so much, but it is something that may be a compromise. But is the left even going to go for that? And my answer to that is probably not, because you have the Tim Walz types, the Mayor Fry types, the Karen Bass types, the AOC and the Squad out there saying all the stuff that they're saying. Oh, this one's going to go a little bit longer. There's another point I want to address. So, one of the things I do think that Gavin Newsom has some merit in talking about is that sanctuary law uh, protects the safety, health, and education and of illegal immigrants. And these seem to be legitimate reasons for sanctuary policies. Now, I think it's generally appropriate. It's generally a good idea when law protects an individual's ability to have safety. What that means is, yeah, I don't think an illegal immigrant should be so afraid of deportation that they don't call the police when there's a violent situation, or where there's a situation where the police need to be involved. Okay, um, because that just makes sense from a human perspective, right? So I think one of the answers to that is, if someone is reporting a crime or a situation that requires police involvement, and they're not the subject, they're not the perpetrator of that crime, perhaps, then no mention of their legal status is necessary, right? So if someone is going to be a witness in a trial or is making that phone call, then I don't think you really need to delve into their immigration status because you want someone, regardless of whether they're an illegal immigrant or not, to report crime, or if they are the witness to a crime and the only witness to a crime, you want them to testify if that's the way they can that perpetrator can be put behind bars. So I think that's a good point on Newsom's part, but I think it can be pared down so that you're not over broadly protecting people for a legitimate notion when that can be contained to limit, the protection so that people that should not be protected aren't protected from involvement with ICE or deportation in general. Health. I don't really see where someone going to a doctor or maybe a state-run health clinic is ever going to be uh, in danger of uh, law enforcement getting, you know, uh, coming on to the point that they're an illegal immigrant. I don't think there's an engagement between law enforcement and health here. So I don't really think that's a legitimate um, concern so much, and not a legitimate reason for sanctuary policies. And then you come to education, and then you get to, a point about education takes money. Are these illegal immigrants actually contributing to the economic benefit of the community? Generally, I would assume that most illegal immigrants are not paying taxes or not as much in taxes as they otherwise would, unless they're like sales taxes and stuff where you don't. If they're Are they paying income tax, right? Are they paying into these systems that are designed to benefit the education system? Now, on a human level, the education of a human being is generally considered a right, and there's merit to that, obviously. So this one's a hairy issue. And again, I think it comes back to, is there an interaction between the school system and law enforcement to the point where this person's immigration status would be known to law enforcement and then subject them to ICE detention and so forth. Now, I generally come from the perspective that anyone who is here illegally should not be here. Okay. And I have already suggested a proposal by which this issue could be solved. And I think when you come to these concerns about sanctuary status and the benefits or harms it does, my proposal is a decent way of avoiding all of this nonsense. Because if you get people on the official record, okay, and they're on this probationary status, okay, then there's no reason for them to fear deportation in regards to whether they're calling the police or whether they're getting a flu shot or whether they're sending their kid to school. If you're on this register already and you're protected to the extent that you're on this probationary period and doing what a decent human being should be doing in this country, so not getting involved with law enforcement to begin with, then you should have no fear of these things, and sanctuary policy becomes no, un, unnecessary, right? As a general matter, when people refer to comprehensive immigration reform, they're generally referring to amnesty, and this is just a non-starter issue. Like uh, amnesty has been done before in the 80s, and we come back to this point where now we have another 10, 15, maybe 20 million illegal immigrants. And by the way, the 11 million figure that has been cited or was cited, I think we've finally gone beyond that, was talked about for uh, quite a long time, since at least the Bush administration, well through the Obama administration. This number was cited, this 11 million illegal immigrants figure. Now we're getting to the point where it clearly is much larger than 11 million illegal immigrants, especially as a result of the failed border policies under the Biden administration, which let alone millions of people in this country. So when someone talks about comprehensive immigration reform, trying to sound like a moderate, just remember all that is amnesty, and that comes first. Amnesty comes first, and then this nebulous notion of border enforcement, okay, that we still have not made good on after 40 years after the this so-called comprehensive immigration reform that occurred in the 80s, right? None of that really came to fruition. So the same idea of whether this means anything other than amnesty is in question. Uh, Newsom doesn't, I don't think he mentions comprehensive immigration. Oh, no, he does, actually. I'm sorry. He does mention comprehensive immigration reform as that phrase, as something he supports. And again, this goes to the point, it just means amnesty. It just means giving these people citizenship willy-nilly without any indication of how long they've been here, whether they've been in the community for a significant period of time, their criminal status other than being a criminal migrant, and so forth. So I think that is something that should ring some alarm bells whenever you hear that phrase. Okay, I'm gonna have to cut like 5 seconds off.